After her divorce, Adanna returned to Obuoma village with her 6-year-old son, Kelechi. She carried nothing but a small bag and heavy tears in her heart. She thought her parents would hold her, comfort her, and tell her that everything would be okay. But when she reached the large wooden gate of her family compound, her father's voice came through the cracks, cold and sharp. "You made your choice when you left this house for that man," he said. The gate stayed closed. The rain started to fall. Her mother watched quietly from the window, her face hidden behind the curtain. Adanna stood there, wet and trembling, holding her child close while neighbors peeked from their doorways, whispering. She spent that night under an old mango tree beside the market. The next morning, she found an abandoned wooden kiosk and made it her shelter. Each day, she woke before sunrise, roasting corn and selling palm oil to feed Kelechi. She spoke little, her pain buried deep, but inside her heart burned a new strength. One evening, an older woman named Mama Binta stopped by her stall. She saw the fine embroidery on Adanna's wrapper and asked if she could sew. Adanna nodded shyly. Mama Binta took her in, gave her a small corner in her tailoring shop, and taught her the business side of the craft. Soon people began noticing Adanna's work. Her dresses carried colors that spoke stories. A city trader, Mr. Okon, saw her designs and offered to help her sell them in town. Together they created a small brand called Kelechi Designs. Orders started coming in fast. Adanna's life slowly changed: new clothes, better food, and hope. Back at her parents' home, life was falling apart. Her father's transport business failed after an accident destroyed his trucks. He grew weak and sick. The proud man who once turned his daughter away now had nothing left. One evening, Adanna heard a knock at her shop. Her mother stood there, tired and broken. She handed Adanna a letter. "Your father wants to see you," she said through tears. Adanna returned home, not as the woman they rejected, but as one they needed. Her father cried when he saw her, whispering that he had been wrong. She forgave him, helped rebuild their home, and cared for him until he recovered. Everyone in the village spoke about her strength, the daughter who was once turned away, but came back to heal the very hearts that broke hers. Standing outside in the rain, Adanna begged her parents to let her in, her voice trembling as she reminded them that she was still their daughter. The water soaked through her thin dress, and little Kelechi clung to her leg, shivering from the cold. Inside the house, her mother, Mama Naji, stood behind the curtain, her heart breaking as she watched her only daughter cry. She wanted to open the door, but her husband's stern eyes kept her frozen in place. Chief Naji sat on his wooden chair, refusing to move. "She made her bed," he said coldly. "Now let her lie in it." The sound of rain mixed with whispers from the villagers walking by. Some shook their heads in pity. Others gossiped under their breath. "That's the woman who failed her marriage," one of them said. Adanna heard every word but kept standing there, her hands pressed against the locked gate. The night grew darker, and no one came to help. When she finally realized they wouldn't let her in, she turned away quietly, her tears blending with the rain. With nowhere to go, Adanna walked to the village market and found an empty wooden stall. She held her sleeping son close and promised herself that one day, things would be different. At sunrise, she cleaned the small space and began selling roasted corn with the little money she had left. People still whispered when they saw her, but she ignored them. She worked hard every day, saving coins in a small tin box. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Mama Binta stopped by and noticed the careful embroidery on Adanna's wrapper. She asked if she could sew, and when Adanna nodded, Mama Binta offered her a chance to work in her tailoring shop. It became a turning point. Within months, Adanna's designs became popular, her colors bright and full of life. As her name spread beyond the village, she started earning enough to build a better life for Kelechi. Yet deep inside, the memory of that rainy night never left her. She learned to smile again, but she never forgot the feeling of standing outside her parents' home, begging to be seen. What they saw as shame became her strength, the beginning of the woman she was always meant to become. With nowhere else to go, Adanna took shelter in an old, broken kiosk near the village market. The small wooden structure had holes in the roof and smelled of dust, but it was the only place she and her son, Kelechi, could call home. Every night, she spread a thin mat on the floor and held her child close as the wind whistled through the cracks. The sound of crickets became their lullaby. She often lay awake, staring into the dark, wondering how life had changed so fast. Once she had a husband, a home, and respect. Now, she had nothing but her child and a heart full of pain. When the sun rose, Adanna got up before everyone else and started roasting corn in front of the market. The smoke from her small fire filled the air as she called out to passers-by, hoping someone would buy. With the little she earned, she bought palm oil to sell in small bottles. Kelechi helped her after school, arranging the corn neatly, smiling at customers. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Adanna didn't complain or talk about her struggles. She kept her pain quiet, her face calm, her eyes determined. Her silence slowly became her strength. The same villagers who once mocked her began to respect her. They saw how hard she worked without asking for help, how she smiled even when the days were long and the money was little. Sometimes, she saw her parents passing by the market, their eyes avoiding hers. She felt a sting in her chest, but she refused to bow her head. Each day she reminded herself that she would rise again, not for revenge, but for her son's future. At night, she told Kelechi stories by candlelight, stories of courage, faith, and hope. "We will not always live here," she whispered to him. "Mama will build us a new life." And even though her hands were rough and her body tired, her heart carried a quiet fire that refused to die. The woman who once stood in the rain, unwanted and alone, was now slowly shaping her destiny from the ashes of her pain. One day, while Adanna was roasting corn by the market, an elderly woman named Mama Binta stopped by her stall. She was known in the village for her kind heart, and for the small tailoring shop she ran near the bus stop. As Mama Binta paid for her corn, she noticed the delicate threadwork on the edge of Adanna's wrapper. The small patterns were neat and beautiful, made with patience and skill. "Who stitched this?" she asked with curiosity. Adanna smiled shyly and replied, "I did, Mama." The old woman looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "You have gifted hands, my child. Come to my shop tomorrow. Let me see what you can do." The next day, Adanna arrived early, nervous but hopeful. Mama Binta handed her a piece of cloth and asked her to sew a simple design. Her hands moved quickly and smoothly, as if the thread obeyed her heart. When she finished, Mama Binta was amazed. "You have magic in your fingers," she said, smiling warmly. From that day, Adanna began working with her, learning new sewing techniques and helping with customers. Weeks passed, and Adanna's creativity began to shine. She started adding her own style, mixing bright colors, bold patterns, and fine embroidery that made each dress special. Soon, women from nearby villages came to order clothes from her. They said her designs made them feel proud and beautiful. Even city traders began visiting to see her work. Mama Binta proudly told everyone, "That's my daughter Adanna, the one who turns cloth into art." Adanna's small corner in the shop became the busiest place in the market. She worked day and night, her fingers moving like music over the fabric. The money she earned helped her buy better clothes for Kelechi and pay his school fees on time. Her life, once filled with shame and hunger, began to bloom again. At night, when she walked back to the old kiosk, her heart was full. She no longer felt like the woman people pitied. She was building something of her own, a name, a future, and a reason to smile again. Adanna had found hope in the most unexpected place, and it was only the beginning of her rise. Adanna's talent soon caught the eye of a city fashion merchant named Mr. Okon, who had come to the village to buy fabrics. He was drawn to a colorful dress displayed outside Mama Binta's shop. The design was bold and different, bright Ankara prints mixed with soft lace and hand embroidery that shimmered in the sunlight. When he asked who made it, Mama Binta proudly pointed to Adanna. He introduced himself and told her that her work had the quality and creativity of a big city designer. Adanna listened quietly, unsure whether to believe him. But Mr. Okon smiled and said, "You have something special. If we work together, I can help you reach more people." At first, Adanna hesitated. She had worked hard to build herself up, and was afraid of trusting anyone again. But after thinking it over, she agreed. Together, they started a small fashion line and named it Kelechi Designs after her son, the reason she kept going when life tried to break her. Mr. Okon handled the marketing in the city, while Adanna focused on creating. Her tiny sewing space became a workshop full of color, fabric, and life. Soon orders began coming from Lagos, Port Harcourt, and even other countries. People loved her mix of modern and traditional African style. Her designs carried a story of strength, beauty, and hope. Every piece she made seemed to hold a part of her journey. The tears, the courage, and the quiet victory of a woman who refused to give up. Within a year, Kelechi designs became well known. Fashion magazines featured her work, and social media buzzed with her name. Adanna's life changed completely. She moved from the small kiosk to a proper house, and built a workshop where other village women could learn and earn. Despite her success, Adanna stayed humble. She never forgot the nights she slept hungry, or the rain that fell as she stood outside her parents' gate. Every time she saw her son smile, she felt thankful for how far they had come. Adanna had risen again. Not through luck but through hard work and faith. Her story became an inspiration across the region. A reminder that broken beginnings can still lead to beautiful endings. Back in her parents' compound, Chief Naji's once bright and busy home slowly grew quiet. His transport business, which had made him one of the richest men in Abuoma village, began to fall apart after a terrible road accident destroyed two of his biggest lorries. The drivers were injured, and the goods inside were lost. The news spread quickly, and within weeks his company started to crumble. Customers stopped calling, debts piled up, and his workers began to leave one by one. The man who used to walk proudly through the market with his head high now avoided people's eyes. At home, tension filled the air. The laughter that once echoed through their compound disappeared. Chief Naji spent most of his time sitting alone on the veranda, staring into space. His health began to fail. He lost weight, his voice grew weak, and his once strong hands trembled when he tried to write. His wife, Mama Naji, did her best to stay strong, but the worry in her eyes showed how much she feared losing everything. The same villagers who used to praise their family now whispered behind their backs. "That proud man's house has turned cold," some said. Others recalled the day he turned his daughter away in the rain. "Maybe this is his punishment," they murmured. Chief Naji heard these whispers and felt them like sharp knives in his chest. Mama Naji often sat quietly by his bedside at night, remembering the daughter they had rejected. Guilt weighed heavily on her heart. Sometimes she thought about visiting Adanna but feared her husband's pride. Still, as his health grew worse and their money disappeared, she began to wonder if it was time to let go of the stubbornness that had destroyed their peace. The compound that was once full of guests now felt empty. Even their relatives stopped visiting. The chickens no longer roamed the yard, and the sound of laughter had vanished completely. Each evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Chief Naji would close his eyes and whisper to himself, "Maybe I was wrong." His pride had cost him not just his business, but the love of the daughter who once begged for his door to open. Months later, while Adanna was arranging new fabrics in her boutique, she heard a soft knock on the door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there was her mother, her clothes dusty, her face tired, and her hands shaking. She looked much older than Adanna remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mama Naji's eyes filled with tears as she reached into her wrapper and pulled out a folded letter. "Your father. He is very sick," she whispered. "He had a stroke. We have lost everything. He wants to see you, Adanna. He says he was wrong." The words hit Adanna hard. She stood in silence, staring at her mother. Memories of that rainy night flashed in her mind. Her father's voice, the locked gate, the cold wind, the feeling of being unwanted. Her heart ached, but she could see the pain in her mother's eyes. It wasn't the same strong woman who had once turned away from the window. This was a broken mother, begging for forgiveness for her family. Adanna took the letter slowly. The handwriting was shaky, barely readable, but she could feel her father's regret in every line. He had written about how he wished he had opened the door that night, how pride had blinded him, and how he longed to see her and his grandson before it was too late. As she read, tears rolled down her cheeks. Her mother fell to her knees crying, "Please, my daughter, come home. He may not have much time left." Adanna gently lifted her up and held her tightly. She could smell the faint scent of home, the one she had missed for years. She wanted to be angry, but the anger melted away under the sound of her mother's sobs. That night, Adanna sat by her sewing table, staring at the letter again and again. Her son Kelechi noticed her silence and asked, "Mama, are we going to see Grandpa?" Adanna looked at him, his innocent face reminding her of love and forgiveness. She sighed softly and whispered, "Yes, my son. It's time." For the first time in years, Adanna packed her bags, not as the woman who was turned away, but as a daughter ready to bring light back to a broken home. Adanna's heart was torn in two. She sat on her bed holding her father's letter, her hands trembling. The memories of that painful night came rushing back, the heavy rain pouring down, her knocking at the gate, her father's cold voice refusing her entry, and her mother's shadow behind the curtain. The pain she had buried for years suddenly felt fresh again. She thought of turning her back, of pretending she never received the letter. Part of her wanted to protect herself from more hurt. After all, he had closed the door when she needed him most. Why should she open hers now? But then she looked at Kelechi. Her little boy stood by the door, his school bag still hanging on his shoulder. He had heard everything. His innocent eyes met hers full of care. "Mama," he said softly, "Grandpa needs us." Those simple words cut through her anger like sunlight breaking through a storm. She wanted to be strong and distant, but hearing her son's gentle voice made her heart soften. She thought about how she had raised Kelechi to be kind, to forgive, to love people even when they hurt him. Now he was teaching her the same lesson. Adanna closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She realized that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing peace over pain. That night, she packed a small bag, folding a few clothes neatly inside. Kelechi watched quietly, helping her without asking questions. The next morning, they took a bus back to the village. The road was long, but Adanna's mind was even longer, filled with memories, her childhood laughter, her mother's cooking, her father's proud smile before everything changed. As they reached the familiar gate, she felt her knees weaken. The same gate that had once been shut against her now stood partly open. Kelechi squeezed her hand and smiled. "It's okay, Mama," he whispered. Adanna took a deep breath and stepped forward, not as a broken woman, but as a daughter ready to forgive. In that moment, she realized that sometimes, the ones who hurt us the most need our love the most. And forgiveness, she thought, wasn't weakness, it was freedom. Adanna returned to her parents' house, but this time everything was different. She was no longer the woman standing in the rain, begging to be let in. She drove through the village in her own car, dressed in one of her elegant designs, with her son sitting proudly beside her. The people who once whispered about her now waved and smiled. They had heard of her success, how Kelechi designs had become famous across the cities. Even the market women who once mocked her spoke her name with respect. As she reached the old compound, her heart beat faster. The same gate that was once locked against her now stood open. When she stepped out of the car, her mother ran to her, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter, you came," she said, her voice shaking. Adanna hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth she had missed for years. The smell of home filled her nose, the dust, the smoke from the kitchen, the scent of old memories. Then her mother led her inside to the room where her father lay. Chief Naji looked smaller than she remembered. The strong man she once feared was now weak, his body thin, his voice soft. When he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but his lips trembled. Finally, he managed to whisper, "I was proud, Adanna, and I lost my daughter because of it." His words broke something deep inside her. She walked closer and took his hand. For a long moment, they said nothing, just looked at each other through tears. The years of anger, shame, and distance melted away in that silence. Her father wept openly. "I thought I was protecting our family's name," he said slowly. "But I was only protecting my pride." Adanna squeezed his hand gently and replied, "Papa, I forgave you long ago." His eyes closed, and a small smile formed on his lips. Her mother stood behind them, crying quietly. That day, Adanna sat by his side for hours, feeding him soup, telling him about her business, and showing him pictures of her dresses. Her father listened, pride shining through his tired eyes. For the first time in years, their home felt alive again. The daughter who once left in tears had returned, not with anger, but with love strong enough to heal everything that had been broken. Adanna forgave her parents completely. She understood that holding on to anger would only hurt her and her son. She arranged for her father's medical care, hiring the best doctors she could find and making sure he had everything he needed to recover. Slowly, his health improved, and the strength returned to his hands and voice. Her mother, who had always stayed close to him, finally smiled again, relieved that their family could be whole. Adanna didn't stop there. She used part of her earnings from Kelechi Designs to rebuild their home. The walls were painted bright, the roof repaired, and the yard cleaned and full of flowers. Rooms that once felt cold and empty now became warm and inviting. Kelechi ran around the new courtyard, laughing freely, while Adanna and her parents worked side by side, clearing old debris and arranging furniture. The house that once rejected her now celebrated her return in every corner. The villagers noticed the change. They had once whispered with judgment when they saw Adanna in her old, tattered clothes, and when she stood outside the gate alone. Now they came to admire her strength and generosity. The woman they rejected is the one saving them now, people said in amazement. Mothers pointed to her as an example to their daughters, and young men whispered about her courage and determination. Her story spread beyond the village to nearby towns, carried by traders, travelers, and those inspired by her rise. Adanna became a symbol of hope. People talked about how someone who was once cast aside could return and transform lives, not with revenge but with love and action. Her journey taught many a powerful lesson. Doors that shut on you today do not decide your future. Strength, hard work, and patience can open new doors, often wider than the ones that closed before. Even as she looked at her father smiling, her mother crying tears of relief, and Kelechi playing happily in the yard, Adanna felt a quiet pride. She had turned pain into power, rejection into opportunity, and broken walls into a home filled with warmth. Her life proved that when a person believes in themselves, even the harshest storms cannot keep them from shining. The village would remember Adanna's name for years to come, not as the girl who was rejected, but as the woman who returned to heal and inspire everyone around her. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more inspiring tales like this. See you in the next video. Take care and stay inspired.